All right, Christian, thank you for joining and thank you for taking the time to come to the podcast today. How are you doing today?
The pleasure is mine. Thank you. I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well too. Thank you for asking. If you could introduce yourself just a little bit to the audience so we know who we're talking
Of course. My name is Christian. I'm a fourth year medical student at SUNY Downstate. That's in Brooklyn. I have an interest in psychiatry. I'm currently in the process of interviewing and applying into that specialty now. It's
to.
been as exciting as it's been chaotic and stressful. Um, and I have a couple other interests in entrepreneurship outside of medicine as well.
Okay, wow, that's great to hear. We'll probably dive a little bit of all of that throughout the episode. But wanted to ask you, I know you give a lot of advice, you help tutor a lot of students. What's your greatest advice for people, let's say, who just took step one, complex one, transitioning from their preclinicals to clinicals? What is the best advice you have for them, and what do you think is the best thing people should do to prepare?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, So the first thing I would recommend is as soon as you're done with step one, take a break.
Okay,
Uh,
okay,
take a break if you can. If you can take it, don't think or look at anything that has to do with medicine. Don't you dare try to pre-study for step two or anything like that. Don't do it. Um,
okay,
some people have no time between their first clinical rotation and the end of step one.
sure.
Some people do. Try to give yourself
Mhm.
that time if you can. Um, but seriously, take a break, relax, don't look at a computer screen for a while. Because the third year, the transition from step one to third year is very different.
Yeah,
Um, it's exciting and it's rejuvenating because it's different and you're not going to be sitting
yeah,
there
yeah,
smashing the same Anki cards that you've been doing the first 2 years or studying
yeah.
UWorld the exact same way that you were the first 2 years. So it's exciting and it can be refreshing. Um, but it's very challenging and very tiring in a different way. I don't want to scare anybody, but it's challenging
It
it's
is.
as challenging as it is exciting.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, what did you do for your break, if you don't mind me asking?
So I was actually able to I went home and spent a little bit of time with
Okay,
my family. I didn't have
okay,
a huge amount of time in between.
sure.
Like some people go, I know some people that went to Europe. They took
Oh,
trips to
wow.
Europe or yeah, for 2 weeks or whatever. I didn't have that much time. I had like about a week, and so I spent it at home doing close to nothing as possible.
That's good. That's good. I remember during my time, I had like a month off, a month and a half. I went to Miami to see the Florida GP. I don't know if you're a fan of Formula One.
Oh, that's
So
amazing.
yeah, that was like I've always wanted to go and I got that break. And you're so right. Right after step one, you just want to relax before going into anything else.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. But is there something, let's say, there's a lot of people in medicine, especially that are like, I need to do something. I need to prepare for the next step. Is there something you think people should do? Let's say if they had my position of a month and a half off, do you think they should start doing something?
If you had to, I
Uh-huh.
know the thing about medical students is that we tend to get uncomfortable with downtime, right? Because you
Hmm.
learn to,
Yeah,
you don't know how to function with free time anymore. So if you
yeah.
have to do anything, implore you not to try to study. Really don't do
Okay.
that. If you have to do something, you can start trying to find ways to make yourself useful for your first rotation. Um, so we could start with internal medicine. I think that
Sure.
that's a,
Sure.
a, a broadly applicable one, right?
Yeah.
So some advice I would give in that case is figure out how to like review if you didn't do a good job, if your medical school didn't do a good job preparing you for this, but start practicing giving like arranging and delivering patient presentations because
Okay.
rounds internal medicine it's literally rounds. That's
Yeah.
literally what internal medicine is, right?
Yeah.
And so make sure that you have that down. Make sure that you could reach out to upperclassmen and ask for survival tips of what they did, things that you need to have, brush up on any clinical skills that maybe have gotten dusty from step one, that kind of thing. I think that's a good place to start,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay. Cool. Cool. Do you suggest people do questions on a daily basis for their self exams and stuff? Or is that something you think should only happen towards the latter half study of the block?
I think that you should start doing questions, and by I assume that you mean questions. In most cases, UWorld is a gold standard.
Yeah.
Although,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, some people do Amboss and stuff like that too. I personally recommend UWorld. I
Okay.
recommend you do them from day one.
Sure.
Um, try to set a goal Be flexible with this goal because it's probably gonna change. But try to set a goal of how many questions per week that you'll do.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly how the distribution is. It depends on the
Yeah,
rotation. It depends on the length of the rotation. But try to finish as all of them, if not as many of them as you can, if not all of them before.
sure. Hmm.
And yeah, I recommend doing. And then so let's just say you have. I'm making this up because I don't feel like doing math. You have 100 days of the rotation, and there's 100
Yeah,
practice questions. So then
yeah,
try to do at least one question every day, so that you
sure.
can make sure that you finish your world before the
Okay.
shelf exam.
You don't recommend doing incorrects or repeating them all in that block?
Yeah, everyone's different.
Sure.
The way my approach to doing UWorld for the shelf exams is focus on completing all the questions at least once and reviewing them thoroughly.
Okay.
Some rotations, it's like there's everyone goes in with this like I'm gonna do everything two times, and I'm gonna watch all the boards videos, and I'm gonna watch all the other videos and stuff like that. But reality will hit you in third year, and there's gonna be some rotations where it's just not possible. I mean, I remember for my OBGYN rotation, that way was no joke. That there you were in the hospital 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. 6 days a week, right? And then we also had quizzes and we had presentations and we had OSCEs and all of this stuff. So if you really think
Wow.
you're going to do two full passes of UWorld for OBGYN during that time, it's most people are not capable of doing that.
Mhm. Okay.
So you have to be
Uh,
realistic.
got it. Got it. No, thank you. Thank you for the realism. Speaking on that, you said boards videos. Like, is there specific videos you find that are the most useful and most like the shelf exams?
Yeah, I will say that I actually did find I found the Boards and Beyond 2 videos. There's some rotations where it's extraneous,
Sure.
or some rotations where they're not as helpful as others. But I found that the Boards and Beyond videos for especially for some of the organ systems that or like not the organ systems, but some of the topics that don't get taught very well in preclinical, like OBGYN, again, I'm going to use that as an example because like we get so little exposure to OBGYN beforehand. So
Yeah.
I found the boards two videos to be very, very helpful for that because it's obstetrics is like a different language the first time that you're learning it. And there's going to be
Hmm.
other examples of that. Like surgery is also going to
Yeah.
be like a different language. So like
Yeah.
in those cases, I think that they actually were very helpful.
Okay. Okay. Do you recommend like Divine Intervention or any of those other podcasts too?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Divine intervention is very good. If you are like me and you get distracted because I have a short attention span, I find myself having to repeat divine intervention, like have to go back, 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 back. There are transcripts of his podcasts online, and there are also PowerPoints that you can find if you go on Reddit,
Mm-hmm.
that will turn his cases into practice questions.
Oh
Um,
wow.
one piece of advice I will say that out of all the divine podcasts that I used, pediatrics was like chef's kiss. Very, very good.
Yeah, no, I remember all the little details for peds. I didn't know like any of them for the test, and I just watched this video over three, four times to understand
Yeah.
exactly what it is. Um, Speaking of which, like, so you got your videos done, you got your questions, podcast stuff. Are you doing practice exams, and how many should you do? All of them, a few of them, save them for a retake if you have to. Like, these are some questions that I get asked. What's your thoughts on them?
That's a great question. So the you have to do the practice shelves.
Sure.
The MBME, they call them the forms, right? You
Hmm.
have to do those. You don't usually there are I think that there's for most rotations, don't quote me on this, but I think that there's about eight per topic
Around
per
eight-ish, yeah, I think. Yeah,
right, plus or minus, right?
yeah.
Um to be completely honest with you, it might be difficult sometimes to complete all of them thoughtfully, in addition to finishing New World, in addition to watching the boards videos. It just depends on the rotation. I
Mm-hmm.
struggle to do all of them.
Hmm.
So if you find yourself pressed for time, make sure that you try to do a practice shelf. Don't try to do one at the end of the first week of the rotation because,
Sure.
try to save them a little bit more towards that second half, in my opinion, so that you have a little bit of something to work with. But you have to go through them. You have to go through them. If you
Okay.
can't do all eight, they're all great. But if you can't do all eight, I recommend doing the four most recent for
Mm.
each rotation. Those are going to be the closest to what you're going to get on test day for sure. And then
Sure.
if you have extra time to do the rest of them, by all means.
Got it. Got it. Speaking of time, there's so many time constraints, like you said, for OBGYN, you had 6 to 6 schedule. how do you make the time to study? Like, what is an example of a schedule that you did on a day-to-day basis to keep up with the material and do well on the shelves?
It's really it can be really hard, especially at first. It's because it's very different from preclinical, right? Where like you kind of your time was more or less yours. It's very different from preclinical because you never really know what's going to be expected of you, and you don't know when you're going to
Sure.
leave a lot of times. So set a goal. I want to have all the UWorld questions for this particular rotation finished by the first of next month because the shelf is a few days after that. Cool. Then figure out if and when you're going to give yourself days off from studying, right? Maybe Sunday or Saturday, whatever you prefer. So then from there, take the number of questions that you have in the Q bank, divide it by the days that you'll be working, and then try your very best to finish those each day. Um, and if you can't finish, there might be days where you can't finish them, but then there'll be other days where you can do more. So then just make sure that you're meeting your goal by the end of the week. The way that you can, there's some rotations where it'll be easier to do that, like psychiatry is going to be very achievable. And then there's going to be some like Gen Surge or OBGYN where it's going to feel impossible at times.
Mm,
So the advice that I have to give when you have to spend a lot of hours in the hospital is you have to get good at using small pockets of time. Because this is something you also didn't really have to necessarily do in preclinical, where you can
yeah,
just go home and then you're home at 4 or 5 o'clock, sometimes even earlier, and then whatever you do, you have all that uninterrupted time to study.
yeah,
You have to use downtime in rotations wherever you can to get 5 questions done here, 2 questions done there, and like because it really adds up. If you can
of
get
course.
5 questions done at the hospital every day, then instead of having to do 15 when you get home, now you only have to do 10.
Hmm.
It makes a big difference. So that's a
I
piece of
got it.
advice I have.
Gotcha. Speaking of downtime, did you ever do Anki and stuff?
Yeah, so for me personally, I found that that Anki with rotations like internal medicine or rotations like OBGYN where you have a time but you get
Hmm.
interrupted frequently, I
Hmm.
found that it was harder to do questions at the hospital because you're just constantly getting interrupted. And so that was where I used Anki because the thing is that if you try to do practice questions where one of the residents or one of the attendings is asking you to do something every 60 seconds, then you end up rereading the same question over and over again and then picking the wrong answer anyways because you're not really paying attention. Because practice questions require a higher volume of focus.
Yeah.
Whereas Anki cards, you only have to pay attention for that one card. And then you accomplish something, albeit it's much smaller, but those wins add up over time too. So for my attention span, I knew that there were certain rotations where, like inpatient rotations, that typically tends to work, you know, um, and stuff like that. So that was kind of a strategy that I used that worked for me. But it really depends on the individual person. Some people can focus even though all the ICU alarms are going off and everything. They could lock
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Some people can do that. So
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I see what you're saying. Um, I'd say kind of to sum it all up, like thank you for all that advice, but sum it all up. What is a key thing you think is key to success in your third year? Like someone going from pre-clinicals or someone listening to this right now, they're like, what's that number one thing I need to learn to master all of third year? Do well on my shelves, do well on my rotations, do well on step two or complex two.
it's definitely the consistency. The
Okay.
consistency as best as you can because each rotation and each day on the rotation and some rotations are divided by where you spend a week on this service, a week on that service. You're going to be changing and everything's going to change constantly. And so
Sure.
trying to be as consistent as you can from day one so that when you have a day where you're there for 16 hours and you don't have any time to study, you can make up for it the next day, or you
Mm,
already made up for it because you're ahead of schedule. So being really, really consistent. And also, Lord, please take care of yourself because there's going to be
mm,
times in third year where it feels like you really can't. And so please, please try to find the space to get as much sleep as you can, and be really like diligent on that. I think that
yeah,
that's like if there's one single thing to take away from it's two big things to take away from all of this is that please take care of yourself and try to be as consistent as you can.
got it. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. Um, and if you don't mind me asking, I know you have a lot of, you're talking about how like time management and stuff, but you said at the beginning you have an interest in other things like entrepreneurship and stuff. If you don't mind explaining, what have you been doing and how do you even balance that in on top of all of this?
Yeah, so I'll be completely frank with you.
Sure.
I would recommend, this is just me. I know some people
Okay.
have different obligations. Maybe they have families to support, maybe they have
Yeah,
research projects that have deadlines, but
exactly.
try to, for your first rotation, or maybe even two, try to give yourself as much breathing room to just focus on figuring out how to third year and don't try to juggle all the balls at once. Do what you can. I'm not going to tell you to just drop everything, but
Yeah,
try to give yourself as much space to adjust because it's going to be an adjustment from what you're used to.
yeah.
And then you will find that there's certain rotations where you can pick up more than others.
Mhm.
And so if you know that you have to get these manuscripts out by the end of the year, I'm just making this up, then
Yeah,
maybe make sure that you use your lighter rotations as an opportunity to catch up on some of that outside stuff, like your research or like your MD plus
right.
membership or like your venture capital meetings and stuff like that, if you
Yeah.
can. But
Mm.
try not to front load it at the very first rotation because it's going to be an adjustment. And then
Yeah,
you'll
it is.
you'll figure just like how with a preclinical, the second year is usually harder than the first year, but yet you get better. Not that it
Yeah,
doesn't get
yeah.
easier, but you get better, right? That's
Hmm.
what's going to happen over the course of third year. And you'll find ways to bring back in those things that you're used to doing outside of school.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Christian.
Of course.
Before we wrap this up, usually we have a tradition of, someone from the previous podcast episode, they ask a question for a future guest and then have you answer, and then you'll ask one for the next one. The question that was left for you was if you were given $100,000 to give to your school, give to your residency place, future residency place, to your hospital, what would you change? And I think in your example, probably because you're a fourth year right now, if it was given to your medical school, what would you change about
That's a really good question. I happen to go to a school that could really use the money. Um,
it? Okay.
I don't know how
Okay.
much you know about SUNY systems, but money is not really abundant. Um,
Sure.
I would say that I would the first thing I would do is buy new keyboards for the love of you know what, buy new keyboards because when I was on my internal medicine rotation, let me tell you something, I did not have a keyboard that worked.
Yeah.
The
Oh,
G
wow.
key didn't
Uh-huh.
work. I didn't want to
Uh-huh.
pull my hair out because all my notes had were missing G's. So the
Uh-huh.
first thing I would do is replace all the keyboards and my mouses, but that wouldn't use all the money. Um, I think that the after that the if I had to guess on the fly, I would probably give money. I think I would give money to the obstetrics department. I
Okay.
think that we have a lot of women in labor and delivery and stuff like that that aren't getting everything that they need. I'll leave it
Sure.
at that.
Sure.
I think
Okay.
that
Yeah.
more equipment, more staff would go a really long way for my hospital. So that's what I would
Got
use
it.
it for, of
Got it. Thank you. That was a pretty thorough answer. I love
course.
the key story.
Oh my, I
It's
wish I was
terrible.
joking.
Yeah.
You can always tell
Oh,
which computer was used to write the notes because there would be no G's in
that's funny. Do you have a question you can think of for the next guest? What is a question that you would have?
Yeah, I could think of one.
Mhm.
Um, what for the next person, ask them because we've all had those days where we just we're like, why did we do this? Or why am I doing
Yeah.
this? Or I don't want to get out of bed, or like, that kind of thing when your alarm goes
Mhm.
off at 5 o'clock in the morning. What is the thing that you tell yourself that gets you out of bed and just makes you
Mhm.
show up every day when things are rough? That's what I would ask.
It's a very good question. I think a lot of people need to be asking themselves those questions often. Wow.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you,
of course.
Christian, for this advice. I think a lot of pre-clinicals will get experience from this, learn a lot. But thank you again for joining.
Of course. I think that's all I have. I've talked enough. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I hope that it helped.
Yeah. Thank you again, Christian.
Okay.